So with that, I'm delighted and pleased to welcome our three panelists this morning. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, but we have Tao Li from UCL in London. Give us a wave, Tao. And
hello.
Good morning. And we
Hello.
have Dr. Caroline Rau from University of Bamberg. And from here in Oulu, Finland, we have Professor Ansi Parsi. So good morning, and thank you very much for joining us to all three of you. And so the topic this morning is this, which is very contemporary and topical, of course, it being a topic. So it's in the wake of pandemics and global threats. What is education's counter-narrative to growing nationalism? And what we're hoping to discuss this morning is really to perhaps to start to understand the nature of nationalism and its effect on globalization. And also, what are the challenges and perhaps the opportunities that come with this shift? And finally, then, as researchers, what can or what should we be doing to help education to formulate a response? And so I'm going to invite our first panelist, Tao Li, and then Dr. Caroline, and then Professor Anssi to give some opening thoughts, and then we'll open up the discussion to all three of you. So over to you, Tao Li, if you could introduce yourself and your area of research and give us your opening thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much for everyone coming this morning. My name is Tao. I'm from University College London. I'm originally from China, where is the start of the pandemic, people think. So my research topic is on how study abroad program can facilitate the students' perception and development of global citizenship. So my research is focused on Chinese international students in the UK. And I interviewed the 19 Chinese students from 3 different universities in the UK for 1 year. And it's quite an interesting time is when I started interview the students, it was September of last year, and the pandemic just break out during my process of the interview research. So I sensed the students, their changing perception of global citizenship and nationalism during my research. So during my second set of interview, which was in this March, I can say the Chinese students, they already started to wear face masks to attend the interview, and I can see their very complex emotion about like how the UK's universities dealing with the pandemic and how Chinese government is dealing with this. And from my current findings, the Chinese international students, they feel they are double victim of extreme nationalism from their host country UK and home country China, because they can sense that in the UK society they get sort of discriminated from local people in UK because they believe students might be carrier of virus and from China. But even worse, students, they get blamed by their own home country, China. Chinese media, they say overseas students, they will import virus back to China. And two of the Chinese nationalist politicians even said that the Chinese international students, they choose to study abroad because they don't love China. So that's, they are not welcome to return home during the crisis. So I really find the international students, they are the double victim of the nationalism from both the home and host countries. So that situation made the students, they question where they should belong to during the pandemic. And in my research, the good news is that the students, they sense that beside their national identity as Chinese students, they think they are a member of their universities, and their educational institution is where they belong to. So we can see during the crisis, students, they exercise their own social agency. They formed some online group like WhatsApp group for Chinese WeChat group, and they started to exchange ideas and help each other. So my thought about the topic is actually university can serve as a small global community for students. And in the pandemic, education for students, they are not just a physical institution in the lockdown. It is a community where students can connect to each other when they feel separated from their home country and not accepted from their host country. So we can see the potential of education and the potential role of university in the pandemic, that they could hold students together regardless of where they are and where are they from, and to form a mini global society and to let students exercise their own capability and global citizenship. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tao, and really interesting to hear from somebody who's actually whose research has perhaps, I guess, shifted as a direct result of the pandemic that we're having at the moment. I'm sure there'll be plenty that we can come back to, but let's move first to Dr. Carolina, and I invite you now to introduce yourself, your research, and your initial thoughts on this topic.
Yes, thank you very much for your introduction. So I'm a research assistant at the University of Bamberg, and I'm working at the Department of Foundations of Education. And the topics of my research are education for democracy, cultural mediation in regard to teacher education, and the epistemological beliefs, especially the nature of knowing or the creation of knowledge. And I'm an expert for reconstructive research. In the following, I will take a special perspective. I intend to reflect the topic of this panel discussion from my educational and pedagogical research perspective. In the following, I will present 5 theses and explain them with my arguments. My first thesis is focused on the term altruism and solidarity. Within the intention to limit the dangers of the pandemic, anti-globalization tendencies are increasing. People are traveling less. Some politicians claim that medical equipment should only be distributed at national level. The borders are closed so that people of other nationalities cannot enter another country. The times for refugees who cannot reach safe ground. My question is, why do the subject of refugees and migrants disappear from the public discourse? Have we forgotten the refugees? My position is that we have to consider altruism in order to avoid general conflicts. Young people must learn to change their lifestyle that the pandemic can be contained. No rave parties like the ones recently held in Berlin last week, for example. No communal fun evenings. By those measures, it may also be possible to protect the older generation or other risk groups and to contain the spread of the virus. You are not only responsible for yourself, but also for large parts of society and the public welfare. However, we must also learn to support each other beyond national borders at international level. A good example for this was the fact that COVID-19 patients from Italy or France were treated in Germany because there was still capacity available in the hospitals here. So the corona crisis had put anew the value of altruism into the center of our concerns. We must now also show solidarity and responsibility for all those in our direct and global vicinity and environment. We should not only think about our own health, we should think and act altruistically. Global learning have to consider the value and the benefit of altruism and solidarity. My second thesis found we need areas and spaces of collective responsibility across national borders. The world community must cooperate and act together. National governments enjoy more or less confidence. Many citizens, at least in a number of European countries, have confidence that their government will fight the pandemic and will develop and enforce measures to control the pandemic. The European Union, the United Nations play a minion role. It is popular to start caring for your own country. For once, it takes a positive view of national egoism, especially against the biological background. By focusing strongly on federal structures and its resources, up to bottom has succeeded in containing the pandemic, at least in the countries of Western Europe. The most important thing here was the unity of purpose of the containing the pandemic, which has also allowed different approaches. This should strengthen the current liberal governments and individual nation states and mitigate right-wing populist forces. However, it will be decisive. Europe must once again have a strong voice and support individual European states in the fight against the pandemic. If the European Union succeeds in establishing a credible and effective support program and thus becomes visible again, we can emerge from this crisis stronger. But if the European Union does not succeed in maintaining the European idea, there's a great danger, the collapse of the European Union. So global learning must then decide for areas and spaces of collective responsibility. We must show solidarity across borders. My third thesis, there's a danger that educational inequality and disadvantages will agree. In some areas, schools and kindergartens are still closed. Many children and young people no longer have any contact outside the families. From an educational sociological point of view, I would state educational injustices are growing. Children from families with a low level of education are not supported at home in the same way as children from a home with a high level of education. Not all children have the technical equipment to be able to participate in class, for example, because of missing laptops or missing internet connections. This concerns in particular children with a migration background and experiences of flight and migration. Moreover, the child labor will increase rapidly because of coronavirus. The United Nations warns today at an International Day against child labor. The devastating consequences of the corona pandemic could destroy the progress made in the past 20 years in reducing child labor. Many families have a lower salary because of the corona crisis. Children have to contribute to the livelihood. So I think the task for global learning is that global learning must improve educational equality. My fourth thesis, the importance of knowledge production and publication of knowledge. We can observe prominent people spread conspiracy theories and ignorance, especially in social media. They charm racism and nationalism content too. These people reach many people with their conspiracy theories. They undermine the reliability of scientists and politicians by spreading untruths. Many people believe these people who spread conspiracy theories. For example, this can unbalance the political system. And for example, in Germany, there have also been demonstrations against the corona measures of the government for several weeks. However, the task for global learning is we must communicate the characteristics of scientific knowledge and the conditions of the validity of knowledge. These affect the realm of epistemological beliefs. Everybody can post anything on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. Nevertheless, not everything is scientifically correct. Children and young people must learn to distinguish opinions from knowledge. And so global learning have to focus on epistemological beliefs. My fifth thesis, the sense of urgency is growing. However, suddenly the impossible is also possible. We know that air traffic is a contributor to environmental pollution and climate change. During the protest on climate change, air traffic was not reduced, but COVID-19 stopped the air traffic. Suddenly, nature is recovering. Pollution levels are falling, and in some parts, nature is recovering. In Venice, the water in the canals trends to become clear again. We suddenly find ways to communicate virtuality without using the airplane. What a great experience. I'm so happy to discuss with you around the globe, but sitting here at my desk at my university, great. We have to make positive use of this sense of urgency. In this way, we can see what is possible in favor of the climate. So global learning must positively turn and use the sense of urgency. After COVID-19, we should continue to use the new technical possibilities, for example, Zoom conferences, in order to reduce or avoid air traffic and in order to increase such opportunities for communication. So we feel the climate change is possible and we have to deliberate. What do we need really? Do we need really the many consumer goods? During the lockdown, we felt that we don't need so much consumer goods. So we have to draw the correct consequences for an environmental conscious behavior after the crisis. Less air traffic, less consumer goods. We should travel less and we should buy less. And it's important to establish our new behavior pattern. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolina, and some really interesting points, which I'm sure we'll come back to. And it's nice to hear some positive messages as well. But now we'll move over to Professor Ansi Parsi, and same with you, invite you to give a brief introduction to yourself and your initial thoughts on this topic, please.
Okay. Thank you. So my background is in human geography and especially in political geography. I have been a professor of geography at Oulu University already 31 years, so it's a quite long history here. My key research fields have been border issues. Border is one of the key terms actually in this COVID issue. We know that quite soon after the disease started to spread, 144 international borders were closed, more or less strictly, and it's a kind of a change in this setting. So I have been also interested in socio-spatial identities and nationalism, which also are at the core of this whole issue. One of my topics has been analysis of school geography textbooks as ideological mediums in the production of and reproduction of national and racist stereotypes. So I have been interested in this issue, and this is also something that has come up in this context of Corona. We know that these politicians have been accusing each other, leading politicians, saying this is a Chinese virus and this is this and that. So it's a kind of playground. So sort of sociology of education is also one of the areas of interest that I have been working on. When I think in general terms what is going on in this pandemic issue, so we are dealing with political geographical key categories like territoriality, how do we use borders in the closing and opening of territories, what is the function, changing functions of state and borders, and ultimately we come, if I think this climate change issue, for example, so we are harking back to the ultimately human-nature relations also here, which is the most general frame, I think, where we can look at the issue. Many people, ecologists, political ecologists, they have been talking about our overconsumption of the world and narrowing ecological corridors, which has made possible for viruses to jump from animals to humans. So these kinds of issues are at the core of this topic, I think. I also have been thinking a little bit what actually are global threats, and COVID-19 of course has been presented as a global threat, and seemingly it must be recognized as such. 7 million people around the world were yesterday infected. It's a huge amount. 400,000 people have died. But when we think global and national and local, we have to recognize this scaling issue, of course, here. All of us know that the pandemics have, at first they have not been a new thing. During the 20th century alone, there have been several deadly pandemics, and they have been earlier more localized than the ongoing COVID. I'm not talking about the Spanish flu, which was, of course, huge problem 100 years ago. But when we think this as a global phenomenon, we have to recognize that global has also sort of differentiated geographies, national contexts and geographical context, so that we know that this is mainly, seems to be mainly a problem of huge population concentrations, big cities. We know that it's not hitting every population group in the same way. It's very much focusing on some social classes and ethnic groupings which are suffering much more than others. And like we academics, we are sitting nicely in our offices and wherever we are, for example, now, and talking about these issues, and others are facing these issues very dramatically in their everyday life. Mobility is an issue that I also have been thinking a little bit in this context. We have to know that, or recognize that these pandemics, they are following from huge mobility of human beings nowadays. We have more than 4 billion air passengers, for example, annually in the global space, which means that the viruses are moving in space with the travelers, and there is no such corner in the globe where we cannot go in few, let's say, 24 hours on the globe, so that everything is a distance between places, and things, they have disappeared quite dramatically. Then we have another element is here that we, for example, in Europe, we found this very dramatically, so that globally we have 1.5 billion tourists annually. And we know that, for example, to Europe, we got this virus from few locations, like from Italy also, Italy and some others, with tourists, also to Finland. In our university, a few weeks after this disease started to spread, we had, was it 17 students in our university who had been on holiday in Austria. They came back, and dramatically we had in Oulu this disease with these people. And the mobility is respectively quite huge issue here. I think that we are returning back to this nationalism issue in our discussion, or what is Joffy's opinion? I have some comments here, but maybe we can go back to this. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Anssi. I think that was really interesting and helpful to contextualize the debate that we're having. And I think, yes, perhaps I can now open it up to all three of you. Some of you, you've all touched on you're coming at it, I suppose, from different academic fields and angles, but there are certainly some common themes, and perhaps that's something that we can begin to discuss. And the first one, which I'm going to ask all three of you, is we've talked about nationalism and nationalism's response, and I think Caroline mentioned, for example, the nationalist response in Germany, and I know that certainly here in Finland and in the US and Italy and other places, I'm interested in that response. You know, it seems that lots of nationalists and nationalist parties are responding by minimizing or perhaps downplaying the COVID virus in particular. And I'm interested in unpicking why do you think that is, and what is that repercussion? What's that going to do for us? The fact that these nationalists are seeking to, you know, how are they interpreting and responding to the latest epidemic?
Okay, so do I start? Or?
Please, yeah, whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, of course, we have to think this in a wider framework again. So this is certainly not only an issue of right-wing parties, but this nationalism comes into play in many ways. I found an interesting political commentator, Gideon Rahman, who wrote that nation states are actually making comeback in 3 ways in the context of COVID virus. First, the emergency that we have now with the pandemic, it makes people and businesses to lean on state. They have been very much, businesses and parties have been trying to withdraw from the state, and now they are leaning again on the state strongly, so that we need support, we need benefits, we need this and that, and this is the first element. And of course, even emotional forms of support given by the state, some kind of identity comes into play here, so that state will save us and so on. These are elements that are missing from global institutions. So it is the first layer of nationalism that comes into play here. Another element which has been quite obvious here is the vulnerability of supply chains in global space. I think that Caroline already mentioned this element that we are lacking protection and testing materials, which can lead to sort of protectionism and nationalism. So that if we have these tools here, we have to keep them for ourselves, not to distribute them to other countries. And for example, in Finland, they have started to make new protection materials in few factories now, when they had been slowing down this business earlier, but now they are coming back. It's a kind of emergency related form of nationalism. In the US, for example, 97% of antibiotics come from China. So you can imagine what it means in the global supply chains and the relations. So it's quite big issue. It's obvious that very likely states will begin to prepare by increasing the self-sufficiency. And, as I mentioned, we have seen this in Finland. So then there is this increasing localism and increasing control of borders, which is quite big issue also here in Finland. We heard yesterday that Finland is opening borders, but they are not opening borders for Swedish people, because Sweden is an exception in Nordic countries with huge death rates, and there is people in Finland, politicians are worrying that something may come here, and because Sweden operates in a completely different level at the moment. Then these were the Rahman's ideas, but I would like to add here the fourth element, that is ethno-nationalism, which is typically related to right-wing parties and their behavior. We know that right-wing parties in many European countries, for example, not only Europe, but also in states and other places, they have been claiming for a long time closing of national borders and have been promoting anti-immigrant attitudes. And there's a big risk that pandemics can increase such claims and create disparaging attitudes towards all kind of global networks, interaction, cooperation, and even claims to close borders permanently that we have seen also in the Finnish context. So these are maybe the nationalist elements that I recognize here. And
maybe that's thank you, Anssi. Maybe that's a good opportunity to ask Tao, because you mentioned, Anssi, the effect of closing borders on and the sort of rise in nationalism in the sense of perhaps based on ethnicity. I'm curious because Tao, your research is directly in that area of the experience of people. I suppose my question to you and to the other panelists is, what are going to be the consequences? We've heard very clearly that you know, we've had all these borders are shutting, and Carolina mentioned also the issue of migrants, which we can also touch on. But there are, you know, we've got hundreds of millions of people, and particularly, of course, at higher education, many people who are not in their country of origin, let's say, for various reasons. I'm interested in your views on how that group of people are going to be affected, and what can we do about that? Because, you know, I think it's a particular challenge for education and higher education, given the globalization of higher education that's happened over the last 30 years.
Yeah, okay, I'd like to take this question. I think the people who, like the overseas students who's outside their country, they really, like I said before, the double victim of extreme nationalism for both sides. And even some students, they might be support their home country and their nationalism at the first place. But during the pandemic, they really realize, because they are not located inside the country, so the closed border means a lot to them. If they are not physically within their country, so it seems like they cannot rely on their own country to protect them anymore. So I think I have another source is during the closed border. There's one factor is magnified of the Chinese people's nationalism. They are very against overseas students to go back, because they think overseas students, they kind of betrayed China to go to another country, and it's also reflect the social inequality. Some people said, oh, the international students, they have money to study in another country, and they are rich, so most Chinese people, they're not happy with those, like the social inequality, and they start to make the international students even more emotionally harder to when they are staying overseas, because they feel people in their own country, they seems not sharing the same thoughts with them because of the social economic difference between outside, like overseas people, overseas students, and the people inside China. So nationalism is not really something separated people from the same country. It seems more like people's perception of the inequality and how the different social class they can enjoy or they suffer from the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. What about the other panelists? Carolina, do you have a comment on the position of perhaps migrants or higher education students who are physically located in a country that isn't their birth country?
Yes, so I can say that nationalism take advantage of an overall social situation, and I think this is very, very dangerous. And I want to stress in this background the importance of education. And I think it's very, very important that we say that together we are strong, and that we say no child left behind. I think that will be more and more important than ever. And to make it happen, people should be sensitized to democracy in order to protect them from dangers of emergent nationalism. And people are sensitized to the world society, for example. They need to be made aware for the extent to which the world is politically, socially, economically globalized, and that there are great dangers in focusing solely on the nation state. And to make it happen, it is also important that social inequalities must be eliminated in order to create educational justice. And the people should sensitize to altruism and solidarity. And at least people should sensitize toward the areas and spaces of collective responsibility across national borders, and the world community must cooperate and act together. But I think the researchers also think about different ways to communicate their own research results. For example, researchers must take their research results available to a broader public. I think this will be more and more important. New communication formats must be developed. Yeah, for example, guiding questions can be, how can YouTube be used to communicate scientific findings? Or how can research be made more application orientated? And how can research results be communicated in a comprehensible and meaningful way? I think with these different types of communication models, then we can reach a lot of people because they watch YouTube or Instagram or anything else. And here the researchers must publish their own results also at this new social media platforms to reach more and more people.
Thank you. I'm interested, all of you have mentioned, particularly Tao and Carolina, this, the importance of university and research, and that I'd like to focus on that a little bit. Carolina, you just mentioned the importance of sharing, and you spoke earlier about knowledge production and the importance of getting that out and getting the research out. And Tao, you mentioned a very interesting idea in your introduction about the idea that universities might be able to serve as small global communities. I suppose a question I have for all of you is, given these possibilities and given the importance of not losing the progress that we've made over the last 30 to 40 years in terms of globalizing higher education, how can we keep that going when the borders are being slammed shut? What do you think universities and we as researchers can do to keep that dialogue and that communication going?
Okay, can I take the question? Okay, yeah, thank you. So I think for international students, they are the most active people globally, like they have the international mobility, and they come to another country just for education. So they don't know anybody locally, and all they know, all they belong to, and all their surrounding is just the university. So maybe we will think university is somewhere to provide the knowledge, classes or research, but actually for students, university is their home in the host country. So I think the international education, higher education need to realize they not provide international students only a degree, an education, they are providing an environment, a community for them. So I think universities need to make some efforts, like have some maybe students, international students support, and to hold those international students together. And those support can easily be held online from the Facebook group, WhatsApp group, so that the students, they can communicate, they can help each other even without university's own help, but university need to build up this community. And I think another things during the in terms of the research, we really need to questionize the role of university, because the function of university is different for home students and for international students. For home students, they have home in the home country, they just go to university to study, to learn. But for international students, that's the whole reason for them to go to another country. And if I talk about global citizenship, global society with international students, all they can sense, all they can feel is what university could provide them. And every day their life is within the university. So I think we really need to rethink about the role of university for international students. It's different from home students. Thank you.
Professor Anssi, what's your, I've realized we're running out of time. I just maybe ask a quick comment from you in terms of what do you see as the key issues or challenges for universities in this context of closing borders and rising nationalism?
Yeah, I think that we have to go ultimately to the basic tasks of universities. We have this role to create scientific knowledge, critical, progressive, empathetic knowledge of this phenomenon, and also something that recognizes the historical roots of economic and social inequality, so that we have to keep these issues in our mind in the long perspective, not only what happens now, because these problems are going to be with us in the future. We have this idea of climate change, which is getting worse. It's making people move. We are going to get more people to locate themselves in different places. And then I think that this idea of critical cosmopolitanism comes, of course, here in the play, that we have to recognize that individuals can dwell in a variety of subject positions and civic identities and forms of belonging, and not close them. We all know, as people who are educators, we know this issue, but not most people don't. And then this is where nationalism easily comes into play, and we have to resist this. I can take one example briefly here, which maybe can be labeled as internal racism. So that I have been reading some papers recently where in United States, for example, we have a group of Asian people who have been born there. Their ethnicity is in Asian background, but they are US citizens. So they have been increasingly attacked because of this pandemic, so that it's your fault, even if these people have nothing to do with this. And this kind of historical and ethnic and all kind of layers come together, and it's the task of us as researchers to make sense of this mess, so to say. And then we need also perpetually education against racism and stereotypes. So this is not a new thing, I would say. It was started by UNESCO in 1947 after World War II, when politicians understood that wars are mainly caused by conflicts and misunderstandings. And then these issues have been on the agenda since then, but now my understanding is that they are not anymore. So we have trusted very much on this, let's say, cosmopolitan thinking, but to resist nationalism, we have to keep these issues perpetually on agenda critically. So that's my view.
Thank you very much. We are very much running out of time. I regret that, but it is what it is. I wondered if we could just finish this really interesting discussion with a very brief final thought from each of you on perhaps one suggestion for where we need more research to respond to this issue of growing nationalism in a time of pandemics and of course COVID-19. So where do you think, where do each of you feel that where would you like to see more research? Maybe perhaps I can start with you, Carolina.
Mm-hmm. So I can say that yes, what is needed from research in the light of growing nationalism. At first I say nationalism, globalization, and world society, world citizenship, solidarity need further research from an interdisciplinary perspective and in cooperation at the international level. This includes more and more intensive international research cooperations through digitization. This is not only promote the acquisition and transfer of knowledge, but also helps to develop a stronger European and world political identity. With regard to resist positions and nationalist beliefs, research should be conducted on how and why such beliefs arise, yeah, and what methodological didactic arrangements contribute to prevent and change such epistemological beliefs. And yes, at least I have to say that researchers really must make their research results available to a broader public, for example, YouTube or anything else. I think this would be very important.
Okay, thank you. Tao.
Okay, so my thoughts is on the potential role and the function of global universities. So during the global threats, can the universities provide another layer of identity to students? Let students think they, instead of they are from a certain country, they are a member of the university's global community. And also, what sort of approach can students hold? Can universities hold students together, where it will be online community, and who will be the facilitators? Are students able to exercise their own agency? And how long those community can last? Can it be a lifelong community this university holds, and all students will become this mini global society forever? So that is my thoughts about the future function of universities.
Okay, thank you, Tao. And a final word from Professor Anssi. What research would you like to see being undertaken?
I don't know if it's only research. I would like to say that there are strategies that we perhaps need here more widely, and of course one of them is this maintaining and increasing the student and research exchange, so that we can change also not only ideas but also contexts, so that people become familiar with all kind of contexts, and through these contexts, these kind of ideas. Then we need, I think, more holistic attitudes towards the world and international understanding, so that perhaps we have been thinking too easily that we are already globalized. But this pandemic has shown that we have very rapidly come back to national context and started to look inwards. So we have to reflect this. Then we perhaps need education for understanding social media, because this is very strategic tool, seemingly, in the context of nationalism. And I have been thinking quite a lot. Was it a mistake to have internet, and was it a mistake to have all these platforms nowadays? So what to do with them? But they can be also very harmful, even if they open the world somehow. And then fourth element is definitely this that I mentioned already, this critical cosmopolitanism and all good that it could bring with it. So these are my ideas, I think.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all three panelists. A fascinating discussion, which I hope will continue long after we stop now.